Thank you all for your attention, and I think they deserve a hand right now for making it this far. And I also want to thank Suzanne McCarran in the back and Ryan Groff. They're the real muscle behind this conference in terms of the planning and the implementation. And for the people who have helped us with the video and the technology, and students who've helped with the driving. So thank you all very much for making this happen. Yes. So we wrap up now with a panel discussion with all of our speakers. And to moderate this discussion, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Sandra Keating, whom I had the pleasure to hear speak at a recent conference at Georgetown University, which, among other things, focused on interreligious dialogue and the Catholic Church after the Second Vatican Council. Dr. Keating is professor of religious studies and the director of their Western Civilization program at Providence College in Rhode Island. She holds a PhD in religious studies from the Catholic University of America, and her special interest is in Christian and Muslim relations. She has many honors and many publications. I'll just list two of them. She's the co-editor of a book entitled Just Wars, Holy Wars, and Jihads, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim Encounters and Exchanges, published by Oxford University Press, and also a book entitled Defending the People of Truth in the Early Islamic Period, the Christian Apologies of Abu Raita, published by Brill Academic Press. And she also serves as a consultor on the Vatican's Commission for Religious Relations with Muslims. And what we've asked her to do is she's been sort of taking notes throughout today. She's going to offer some summary reflections of her own and then moderate a discussion among the panelists and also throw it out to the audience for some final Q&A. So let me welcome Dr. Keating.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today. This has been quite fascinating for me to listen to other people who have been struggling with many of the same issues that I have been for about the last 20 years, trying to figure out how do we present Islam in a classroom setting. Oftentimes, when we don't have a whole lot of time, we don't have a whole lot of resources, and I teach and have taught mostly in Catholic universities, which, as we've seen already today, have a commitment to interreligious learning and interreligious study, but are denominational. And how do we balance that? I want to say just a little bit about my own experience, because I think it's kind of interesting since there are so many students here. A number of people have said today that you never know where you will end up. And if someone would have told me when I was an undergraduate, I started out as a home economics major. I'm from the Midwest in Minnesota, and I began studying music instead. I got a minor in philosophy, a minor in theology. I was a liturgical music major, and then I went off on a study abroad in Europe and ended up studying theology. At the time that I decided to start studying Islam, it was at the recommendation of one of my professors. I was talking to a professor in a coffee break. We had long classes, and we had a little coffee break, and he said, "So why are you studying theology?" And I said, "Because I'm very interested in monotheism. I'm particularly interested in Judaism and how one can talk about Trinitarian theology and monotheism." And he said in 1986, "Well, if you're interested in monotheism, you should study Islam, because no one is studying Islam." Turned out that was true. And in fact, I decided to go to graduate school. I started studying Arabic. The entire time I was studying Islam, learning Arabic, learning the languages that were necessary, the constant comment that I got from everybody, from my parents to my best friends to people in my graduate classes, was, "What are you going to do when you're finished?" Because, of course, in the 90s, Islam was not on anyone's radar screen really at all. And I kept thinking, well, I can get a job teaching world religions. Maybe I can, teach general Catholic theology. I defended my dissertation in the spring of 2001. And right at the time when the day that I was actually going to my first major conference to give a paper on Abu Raita, who no one has ever heard of, was 9/11. And everything changed after that. And immediately, there was a great concern. What is Islam? Who are these people? What's their relationship with Christians? Are they pagans? Are they polytheists? Should we be afraid of them? And all of a sudden, I had a job, much to my parents' relief. But I say this, I tell this story because I want you to realize that to be open to the various ways in which God can lead you, and to not be afraid to do things that everyone says you might not get a job. Because you never know where that's going to take you. And I look back on it and I realize that actually I had been led up to that point. I was in a position where I was able to kind of step in and help people to make sense out of something that I was very interested in. Of course, I had studied a medieval theologian, and everyone wanted to know about contemporary. I think that came up a number of times today, that you have to make your topic actually fit the modern world. But I think it shows us something that has been a theme. I mean, part of my job today is to identify a few themes that have come out in this conference. One is, I think, that's become fairly clear to us, is that we are both participating right now in what is a very, very long history of Muslim-Christian engagement. We should not forget that Muslims and Christians have been engaged with one another from the very, very beginning. Already in the Quran, we see this kind of engagement. And Muslims and Christians have lived side by side in various parts of the world, sometimes together fruitfully, sometimes together in tension and in conflict. This is not a new situation, all right? What is new, I think, is that we have a different perspective for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is that we are tremendously connected today. We are very aware of what's going on the other side of the world. And that knowledge is interpreted for us. We can take our phones and we can follow a Twitter of somebody on the other side of the world telling us immediately things that are going on. I know during the Arab Spring, people were taking pictures of on their phone and sending them to people. We had real-time experience. This is something that is brand new. So in some ways, our situation is very, very different. And from the perspective of a professor, I think what I'm constantly concerned about is, what do I want my students in that very short amount of time that I have them to learn that will help them to make sense out of the globalized world. And I think in their own way, each of the presentations that we've seen today have addressed this. And I'm actually quite pleased, because as I sat down and really thought it through, they bring a number of different things that I think we need to think about. This morning we heard Dr. Reynolds talk about the need to have a certain openness to the beauty. He talked about the idea of a system. One thing that I've tried myself, and I was very appreciative of what he was talking about, is this of putting ourselves in the shoes of another person, to think about, what does it mean for me to be a believer in this religious tradition? To think about it as a coherent system. What kind of questions is it answering? How does it answer these questions for me? And that helps us then, I think, to make sense out of a lot of things that might otherwise be completely mysterious to us. To be able to understand a religion as a coherent whole, or as a coherent system. Now, it's not just a system. The question about, where does spirituality fit in that? I think that is very much a part of it. How do my religious longings fit into this system? Sometimes I think we have a temptation of course, putting our own expectations, our own questions, our own thoughts on top of the religion. And I think we need to help our students to be able to figure out how it is that, as Gabriel said, how can we achieve admiration for the good things in this religion? What is it that we can appreciate about this religion? The second one, Dr. Rood, very important, I think, started out by talking about not essentializing a religion. This is something that the more I study, the more I feel almost incapable of teaching. Because the more I study, the more I realize how complex everything is. And no matter what I say, there's always an objection to it. It's always more complicated. My students get tired of me saying, well, it's really complicated. Because in fact, it is really complicated. And we can, when we try to teach about a religion, especially because we only have a short amount of time and our students are captive for a very short amount of time and they're getting a grade, so they're paying attention. But it's easy for us to kind of funnel it down into, a few little blurbs. What is it that we want them to walk away with? And that can, if we don't, really look carefully at historical situations, at the context, connecting it to historical realities and experiences, it just becomes a bunch of kind of precepts. Okay, Islam is about this and this and this and this, and it's the 5 pillars, and it's they go on the Hajj, and the few things about the Quran, and that's really not Islam any more than Christianity is really just the summary of the points of the creed. That's part of it. It's a significant part of it. It might be very much the foundation of what unifies Christians, but that's not what Christian life is about, and any more than these things are what Muslim life is about. Which brings us then to the next one, Professor Haviland Harper, is that okay? That what we're really trying to do, I think, and this is where I've also gone in my own teaching, is that we're preparing global citizens. We need to be in this constant engagement with ideas and people who are different from us. Several times the questions have come up in this workshop today of, so what does it mean? Why should I, as a Christian, study this? What do I get out of it? What can I learn? Where, is it just me gaining some knowledge for an exterior purpose, perhaps evangelization, or so I can understand the newspaper, or something more instrumental? Rather, my own experience has been, and I think this was seemed to have been echoed by several people today, my own experience is that confronting someone else's beliefs forces me to re-articulate and rethink my own beliefs. My professor, years and years ago, was right when he said, if you want to know about the Trinity, study Islam. Why? Because Islamic theology takes almost an opposite view on the Trinity. And the more you look at it, you go through stages of, no, it doesn't, yes, it does, no, it doesn't, yes, it does, because it's very complex. Again, it's very complicated. But I think for looking at the positions and viewpoints of someone who is different from us forces us to think about our own beliefs in a very different way. An example that I'll tell you, I'm very often involved in Muslim Catholic dialogues, and we have 3-day workshops or something, and we get together and we talk about a topic, and it's always very awkward. I can tell you, it's extremely awkward when we take a break so the Muslims can go and pray. And I go stand out in the front of the building, with the priests, smoking cigarettes, hanging around talking, and we're thinking, they're in there praying. We should be doing something, shouldn't we? I mean, it's a really interesting experience because it makes you stop and think, wow, that's a real commitment that I ought to have. that I ought to be doing something during this time. And oftentimes what happens then is that, we'll take the opportunity to go and, say the rosary or read from the breviary or have a short mass if it's, at a certain time of the day. It can force us to stop and rethink our own Christian life. And I think this is an underestimated aspect of interreligious relations. The Quran says this very nicely, that we ought to vie with one another, to become better. And it should. It should make us think about why do we believe what we believe? Muslims put a great deal of emphasis on care of widows and orphans. Do we? It's not just, what are they doing that's not good and what I'm doing better. But, what is it that they kind of show us up on? Okay. Which brings me to the last one. I thought Dr. Hussein very well, talked about this whole trap we can fall in of ideals versus reality. We point out all the saints, all the good people, all of the good things about our own religion, and then we turn around and point out all of the things that members of another religion have done bad, things that they fall short on. And I think also this is where I think in our own teaching, trying to find a balance, really talking about what contribution does my religion make? Why do I believe it's true? At the same time, recognizing that we're all human beings and we all fall short. And just because we can't judge a religion based on the fact that human beings are falling short, because we also have this problem in our own religion. I think, and I'm going to kind of tie this up here, so that we have plenty of time to talk about this. But I think when it came down to what I kept hearing over and over again was an emphasis on the importance of an actual encounter. And although that sounds so obvious to us, it can be very, very difficult, especially in an academic context. It's easy to talk about ideas. It's easy to talk about things in the abstract. What's really important is the actual, personal engagement. I know for myself, my own class, I was glad somebody else asked this question. I've tried many times to go to the mosque. The closest mosque to us has very erratic hours. It's very hard to find, because it's staffed by volunteers. And as much as we try to go to a mosque and have that first, that personal experience, it's very difficult. But I still encourage my students to try to go when it's open, because that is such an important experience. It can be uncomfortable. It can be very positive. But that personal experience is really what we want our students to gain. And so I think I'm gonna end here just by saying that I'm extremely pleased that this conference is happening. I also think that based on my own experience, this is just the very beginning. This really is, it's a new field of study. I think we need to have more opportunities for people who are teaching Islam in the classroom to get together and talk about it, because I feel like we brought up a whole bunch of topics and we didn't actually answer anything in particular. But I also feel like it's something that the very fact that we're paying attention to it and we see that it's so important, and we see that all over people are beginning to teach about Islam in their classrooms, that students are beginning to expect that of us, that this means that it's something important that we need to take notice of. So on that, I'm going to end my part